This is Zach.
And my name is Zijan.
And today is a lovely day for our IB Year 2 English podcast.
And we're going to be answering the question, how can texts offer multiple perspectives of a single issue, topic, or theme? And our thesis question that we're going to be responding to is going to be, how does Morrison's Beloved and Mephusa's Thief and the Dogs offer multiple perspectives of dealing with traumatic happenings of the past?
These two texts both have big motifs of mental imprisonment, as both of as many characters in the books struggle with overcoming their past.
To start off, Beloved follows a family that is physically free, but because of the effects of slavery, has become mentally imprisoned. It has aspects of magical realism in order to give insight into how slavery caused trauma that's been deeply rooted within each of their characters.
And Thief and the Dogs is about the main character, Saeed, who grows up in pre-revolutionary Egypt, but he lives a very revolutionary lifestyle. And he goes to jail for his revolutionary actions, and when he comes out, Egypt has undergone a revolution. So everyone he knows from the past that he used to be like revolutionary friends with is now matured and moved on. Not matured, but moved on and is different now. His family is moved on. They're with other people now, and he loved his past life so much that's all he wants to focus on, and he refuses to become a functioning member of society.
So to start off, in Beloved, we're going to be looking at one of the main characters, Paul D, and we're going to be looking at how his traumas are represented throughout the book. And the way Paul D describes it is like how his heart had been replaced by a tobacco tin can. And we can see it written in the book where Morrison writes, saying more might push them both to a place they couldn't get back from. He would keep the rest where it belonged, in that tobacco tin can buried in his chest where a red heart used to be. Its lid rusted shut.
So don't you think this quote is kind of like two-parted, where the first part is like pushing them to a point where they could not recover, showing that like these people who apparently have such a close connection can't even talk about their own past, and the second part being like how he stores his own trauma, and it's like a metaphor about like a tobacco tin?
Yeah, and especially like the significance of him mentioning how like it's rusted shut. Like he just shows how even though him and Seth are like this close, he can't open up about his past. Like he just physically does not want to.
Yeah, the rust is also kind of like, it shows that it's like older trauma, because like this tobacco tin has been around for a long time. Like he's
like it's kind of weathered down.
It's weathered down. This is weathered trauma. Like this trauma has been like he's been holding on to this trauma for a long time. And like the Morrison uses rust to like connote that like this is like he's had this can. Like this is not a new thing.
Yeah.
And similarly with Setha, her method of like coping with the trauma is very similar. In fact, wait.
You want me to go?
Yeah, I can go. So it's like it's another metaphor. This one is a hobnail casket of jewels found in a tree hollow. Should be fondled before it is opened. Its lock may have been rusted or broken away from the clasp. So again, it's rust is mentioned again, showing that both of these characters who have lived through slavery and dealt with slavery, their trauma is rusted, and it's both of their methods of holding the trauma. They're both like containers. Like Seth is like a hobnail casket of jewels, and Paul D is a tobacco tin. But they're both used for the same purpose of concealing their trauma and not opening up about it.
Yeah, and yeah, once again, it shows the significance in that it talks about like it being rusted and like broken away from the clasp.
Yeah, exactly.
Now it's just not going to be. It's not something.
It's not going to be open anytime soon.
Yeah. Like either of them want to open up about.
Mm-hmm. Now, inversely, Denver, because Denver is much younger. Denver is Setha's daughter. Denver has a different. Or Morrison conveys Denver's trauma in a different way. Specifically, it's still used as metaphors, but Denver's trauma is tied into Setha's. Denver used to go to school, and one of the children told Denver about how Setha had killed one of her siblings. And from this quote, it reads, "The thing that leapt up had been coiled in such a place, a darkness, a stone, and some other thing that moved by itself. She went deaf rather than hear the answers, and like the little 4 clocks that searched openly for sunlight, then closed themselves tightly when it left." So this quote is...
it's kind of like two-parted almost.
Yeah, it is two-parted.
The other quote.
Like the other part, true. This one is also used like as a metaphor, you can tell. There's a few metaphors in here. But it's different, right? You can tell this is like newer trauma.
Yeah. Like it's talking about how it's been coiled up in such a place, like similarly to Seth and Paldi, like it's been there, like it's like something that like it's newer, but it's still been there for like a significant amount of time.
But the thing that's like different with like this trauma is that Denver didn't even know about it. Like because of Setha hiding her own trauma in her hobnail casket of jewels, Denver was never told about this. So the first time she heard about it, everything kind of makes sense. Like the trauma is now sprung up from the darkness. Like this thing, like quote unquote thing, is now apparent to her. And instead of recognizing this trauma and like working through it, she takes the approach that they also took, which is just
avoiding
it, shoving it down, going deaf in this case.
Which we could, she went deaf rather than hear the answers.
And overall, it's very interesting because it's all metaphors to show the trauma, which is a similarity. But the effects of trauma are shown through the non-linear narrative structure and stream of consciousness. Do you wanna explain one of them?
Yeah, like kind of how the effects of the trauma aren't really shown specifically for Beloved. Like we don't find out that for Setha. We don't find out that Setha had killed Beloved until
chapter 17, I think.
Chapter 17.
Chapter 17.
Extremely late in the book.
Way later in the book. And I mean, once that kind of happens, everything like makes more sense in the novel, right?
Yeah, it's like putting a puzzle together.
Literally.
It's like it leads up to this like big point in the story, which puts everything together.
Yeah, so the reader is kind of dealing with almost what like Denver went through in a way, where it's like they don't even know this trauma. They can see the effects of the trauma, but they don't know what the trauma is because the trauma is so repressed that Morrison doesn't even talk about it. Very similar to Setha. And secondly, we can talk about the stream of consciousness. So the way all these are similar is all of these metaphors are told through the stream of consciousness of the character.
Yeah, like we get to understand their
point of view.
Yeah, like their flow of thought, like what they think. Like not like we don't learn Paul D's traumas through Setha. We learn it through like what Paul D thinks, like how he stores them in the rusted tin can and.
We see everything through like their point of view, which gives us more insight to how they deal with their own trauma, and how this trauma has affected them as people. So in conclusion of just this, Morrison utilizes confusion to leave a text filled with answers to questions that are not present. So we have all of this information about the trauma, but we have no idea what the trauma is, which is, again, due to the nonlinear narrative structure. This is all due to the slavery that they experience, like in the book, besides Denver, but Denver is also affected by the slavery because her mother was affected by the slavery.
Which like reflects onto her.
Yeah, and it's also like, it caused them to distance themselves from their own trauma, restricting them mentally, and resulting in them living lives that are confined by the trauma. Like Paul D refuses to stay in one place for too long. Setha refuses to like relive her past, and Denver like refuses to like almost live a life because she's so confined by her like deafness. Yeah, which is very interesting. And it's a very good example of how characters can be mentally imprisoned by their trauma. Yeah. So our second text is Thief and the Dogs. Do you want to talk about how Egypt was before the revolution and how like Said acted?
Yeah, so the main character Said was living within pre-revolutionary Egypt, right?
Yeah, so like he definitely like lived he grew up living the revolutionary lifestyle. Like this is what he was used to, right?
Yeah, like that's his like lifestyle. Like,
yeah. So like when he went to prison, like, and Egypt underwent a revolution, like that's like a big change for someone, don't you think?
Yeah, like he's held back from so much like
learning almost and growing,
like life that went on. Like
yeah, exactly, because like 5 years is a long time.
Yeah, he's just restricted from the whole revolution just went on while he was in prison.
Literally
went through, and
he lost his family too.
Yeah, and his wife, his child.
So
and by the time he comes out, it's like the revolution's over,
and people have changed.
Yeah, but he still lives that life as a revolutionary
because he never grew from the old one. And then it's kind of crazy because it's like in his mind, Said's new life of like pre or post revolutionary Egypt is like associated with sadness and like loss and confusion because now he no longer knows how to function in this society. He doesn't have his family, so all of this is kind of correlated to like his new life. So he thinks about his past and he thinks about all the happy times where he had his friends, he had Nabuiba, he had and he had this daughter, and he kind of hyperfixates on this like reality that he no longer has,
and he like wants to get it back.
Yeah, he wants to get it back the most.
Yeah, and like that's his main thing. Like it starts off with like as soon as he gets out, he's like, "Where's my daughter? Like,
Literally.
Where's my wife?"
And then he meets his daughter's wife, and his daughter doesn't recognize him.
Yep, because she like just hadn't grown up with him. She'd grown up with Nabuia's new husband, who used to be his old friend.
Exactly.
Which,
his wasn't he like his like protege?
Yeah.
And like the craziest part is like as soon as Sana doesn't recognize him, he gets in his head. Like the stream of consciousness starts happening.
That's where it like instantly kicks in. Like that's where he like just pure flow of thought. Is shown throughout the entire book.
And it's almost unhinged. Like his train of thought, like he thinks some pretty messed up thoughts.
Yeah, like it just goes like to just straight to murder, like
literally
just killing.
And like a quote for this would be like, can you pull up the head quote real quick? Like, do you want to read the head quote?
Yeah, it was talking about how he's kind of like obsessed with people who like hurt him in his past, like even whether or not it was intentional or not. We kind of learn it through the stream of consciousness, which is shown through this quote, where it goes. He says, "To kill them both, Nabuia and Ilish, at the same time, would be a triumph. Even better would be to settle with Rauf Ilwan. 2, then escape. Go abroad if possible." Which kind of shows like how, like Rauf Ilwan was one of his best friends, and he'd also moved on into a new life.
Specifically, he is successful in this life too. He runs a newspaper, and he's made money. He's used his skills that he actually learned from the revolution. He was a good leader. He took these skills and applied them to modern day Egypt, and Said sees this as betrayal, when in reality it's really not betrayal. But he's so self-obsessed with his own reality and getting his like way of life back. This like alteration of his like life is he takes it personally, and like
he like blames people that have nothing to do with like his like his actions,
literally
stuff like that. Yeah.
So, and I mean it's kind of showing that like he's so obsessed with getting his old life back, he refuses to like think critically and like attempt to move on. And of course, like tying this back into like the trauma, of course his trauma is losing his family, losing his daughter, and attempting to recover that. And
like and his best friend.
And his best friend, of course. And he hyper fixates on his trauma, and he just refuses to like drop it. Like this is the only thing he thinks about. And he even goes on, he loves to talk about killing. He kills someone. He kills 2 people actually.
Yeah. And those 2 people were supposed to be one person, which he got
He was supposed
wrong.
to get he was supposed to get Naboya.
Yeah.
And he was supposed to get Ralph.
Ralph, yeah.
But he ends up killing 2 innocent people. And then again in his little self-obsessed trauma era, he kind of puts himself on trial. Do you want to read that quote for us?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it starts off by saying, "The silence of the graves is more intense, but you can't switch on the light. The flat must look the way it always has when Nur is out. Your eyes will get used to the dark."
So he's saying that he's lived this lifestyle of like sadness, like the dark. The dark represents sadness, isolation, and loneliness. And he's saying that the silence of the grave is more intense, meaning that the aspect of death without like getting his life back is crazy. But he's able to live this evil life because he's gotten used to it. Because he wants his past back, and he's done these horrible actions, but he's used to it. He's like okay with it.
It's almost as if he's using like the fact that he needs to get his past back as like
motivation.
Motivation, like an excuse to like do these things.
Which is true. I mean, and he does.
Yeah.
And again, through the stream of consciousness, we're able to, or I mean, Mahfouz communicates to the reader that he wants what he had so bad. He wants it so bad. He kills people, and he still doesn't get it back. And the lengths he's willing to go is insane.
Yeah, and so one of the main things that differ from Beloved that I want to ask you about was the fact that it's a linear narrative compared to Beloved, which is a non-linear narrative. Yeah. Like, how do you think that plays a role on like how we see the trauma presented.
Well, I think it's really interesting because, like we mentioned before, like a few minutes ago, the non-linear narrative of Beloved highlights Setha's trauma, how she wants to like hide it. She has her jewel box, and she stores the trauma in there. Versus Saeed's trauma, they're both very similar traumas. It's about they're both about losing children.
Yeah,
but
it's like losing children and things.
Yeah, Saeed lives in the past, while Setha actively avoids the past. So the non-linear narrative shows that even she's not even trying to communicate to the reader her past, versus the linear narrative of Thief and the Dogs and the very consolidated, or the very clear constructed timeline shows that Saeed, it's the only thing he thinks about. The past is the only thing. The past and his actions of how he's going to bring the past back are the only thing he thinks about.
Yeah.
So,
like what we said earlier, it's like his like motivation, his like sense of doing things.
Precisely, yeah.
Is because of that.
And even the metaphors in Thief and the Dogs and Beloved are a little different. Where it's like the metaphors in Beloved all revolve around like the trauma caused by slavery, like Paul D and
the tobacco tin can, and then Setha and her hobnail jewel box,
casket, and like the metaphors in Thief and the Dogs are about like revenge, and specifically like there's like a trial undertone. Like could you read the one about the hangman, the asking for the head of the hangman?
Yeah, let me pull it up really quickly. Right.
Yeah.
All right. It starts off with, I will always seek the head of Rauf Yawan, even as a last request from the hangman, even before seeing my daughter. I am forced not to count my life in days. A hunted man only feeds on new excitements, which pour down upon him in the span of his solitude like rain.
So, again, stream of consciousness, but the metaphor where it's like, well, not even metaphor, this is like a comparison where he's comparing his last request of killing Ralph Ewan as before he dies. So like death is a very big diction because his past has died, and he feels like he's also going to die, and he uses death as like a tool to get like his dead past back. So that's where the metaphors kind of differ between the novels. One is about like holding trauma like back from the present, and one is about going backwards in the past to fix the trauma. Yeah. So let's see. Do we have anything else? Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
Okay. Good game.